I watched that pen in my husband's hand, the man I'd loved for 40 years. That sound of a pen scratching paper was the moment our golden years died. That one signature, that simple flick of John's wrist, ended up costing us everything. This could be your story. This could be your husband, your father, your pension, your signature. This is my personal warning to you, a warning from the wreckage of my own life, about what you need to know before you ever let anyone near your life savings. 40 years. It really is a lifetime, isn't it? John and I met as kids, full of that silly hope you only have when you're young. We married and moved into a little house with mismatched curtains and secondhand dishes that never quite matched. I can still smell the laundry drying in the kitchen, a clean scent that made the peeling wallpaper feel like home. We built a life in that house, filling it with the sound of our children's laughter and the sight of my chipped teacups on the counter, always ready for a neighbor to stop by. And through it all, there was one constant, steady rhythm: the sound of John's steel-toed boots on the porch steps every morning before dawn. John was never a man of grand ambitions. He was a factory man, a supervisor for a company that made auto parts. For 40 years, he woke up before the sun, pulled on those boots, and walked out that door. He worked through brutal summers when the factory floor felt like a furnace, and freezing winters when you could see your breath in the air. He'd come home with grease under his fingernails and a tiredness that settled deep in his bones. But he never, ever complained. Because for John, that job was more than just a job. It was a promise. The promise was his pension. It was the foundation of our entire future, the reward for a lifetime of hard work. We didn't have stock options or fancy 401ks. We had the pension. It was a word that meant safety. It meant that one day the pre-dawn alarms would stop and we could finally rest. I think back on all the small sacrifices that built that pension, our shared family treasure. Every decision felt like a deposit into our retirement dream account. Me, patching the kids' jeans by lamplight instead of buying new ones. That was a deposit. Reusing the old Christmas decorations one more year, telling ourselves one day when we retire. Another deposit. Every overtime shift John worked, every leaky faucet we fixed ourselves, it all went into the bank of our future. Our dreams for retirement weren't flashy. We dreamed of slow mornings with coffee on the porch, watching the birds. I wanted to take painting classes at the community center. John wanted to finally build a workshop in the garage and restore the old '67 Mustang that had been sitting under a tarp since our son was born. I remember the day he brought it home, a young man with a crazy grin, so proud to sit behind the wheel. Most of all, we dreamed of spoiling our grandkids, of taking them to see the ocean without having to check our bank balance first. This future didn't feel like a fantasy. It felt earned. As John got closer to 65, things at his company started to change. Pension was a word you heard less and less. Men in suits, young enough to be our sons, would stand in front of charts we barely understood. They spoke a different language: asset allocation, risk tolerance, market volatility. They made our simple, solid pension sound old-fashioned, almost dumb. "A pension is static," one of them said. "With inflation, safe can actually mean you're losing money every year." That word, inflation, hit me like a poison dart. The thought that our nest egg could just be eaten away was a new kind of fear. The seed of doubt was planted. Was our bedrock actually a foundation of sand? And that's when Mr. Albright walked into our lives, a man who promised to protect our legacy. We thought the pension was a promise. What we didn't know was that promise was about to be broken in the cruelest way. We met David Albright at one of those free retirement seminars. He lingered by the coffee station, a kind-faced older man who spoke our language. He didn't talk about market risk. He talked about peace of mind and protecting what you've earned. "Trust me," he said with a warm smile. "I'd never recommend something I wouldn't do for my own family." He offered a free consultation. "What do we have to lose?" John finally said. "It's just a talk." Albright's office was modest, approachable. He painted a picture where our pension check would get smaller and smaller every year because of inflation. "When you're gone, the money stops," he explained. "It vanishes." "What about a legacy for your children?" Then he introduced his solution, a pension rollover. We could take the entire lump sum value of John's pension and roll it into a personal retirement account, an IRA. He pulled out a glossy brochure with charts that all pointed straight up. "We put your money to work," he said, tapping a steep upward curve. "We invest it in good solid stocks and bonds. It's your money under your control." He made our greatest asset sound like a trap. He preyed on our deepest fears, running out of money, being a burden, and he played on John's pride like a finely tuned instrument. "A man like you, John," he said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "A man who built things with his own two hands his whole life, deserves to be in the driver's seat of his own future. You've worked too hard to settle for crumbs from a corporation." John thought he was protecting us, taking one last heroic step as a provider. But in reality, he was being led straight into a trap. "Is it risky?" I asked, my voice small. A little voice, my own intuition, screamed at me, "This is a mistake. Don't do it." I could feel it deep in my bones, a cold dread that had nothing to do with numbers. "Everything has some risk, Martha," Albright said in a patient, fatherly tone. "But we manage it. The real risk," he added, his voice dropping, "is doing nothing and letting inflation eat your life's work." I looked at my husband, at the hope in his eyes. How could I stand in his way? How could I, who had never managed our finances, question this expert? So I silenced my fear. I chose to trust my husband, and he chose to trust Mr. Albright. It's a choice I would come to regret every single day. We went back 2 weeks later. The paperwork was all ready, dozens of pages of fine print. Albright just pointed to the signature lines. "This just authorizes the transfer," he said breezily. John picked up the pen. He looked at me and gave a small, confident nod. "Please, John. No." I begged silently, my throat tight. But my voice wouldn't come out. I just sat there, frozen. He pressed the pen to the paper. We thought we were signing for security. We were really signing away everything. The first few months were incredible. Our first IRA statement came, and the number had already gone up. John started checking the balance online every single day, a new ritual. "Look, Martha! We made $1,000 this week just sitting here," he'd say, giddy with a new kind of excitement. It was intoxicating. We started dreaming bigger. Maybe that trip to Italy wasn't so crazy after all. My initial fear just melted away. Albright would call every few weeks. "See? The market is strong," he'd say. We were investors. The first signs of trouble were small. A news report about a struggling bank. A small dip in our account. "Just a minor correction," Albright assured us over the phone. "This is normal." We clung to his words like a life raft. But the dips got deeper. The news anchors started to sound concerned. Words like recession started popping up. John's daily ritual of checking the account became more anxious, his mouse clicking, refresh, refresh, refresh. Each click like a nail in a coffin. The number wasn't climbing anymore. It was shrinking. "It'll bounce back," he'd mutter, mostly to himself. It always does. Then came the crash. It was a relentless, soul-crushing waterfall of loss, week after week. It was like watching our house burn down in slow motion. Our life savings, our future, was evaporating. Each drop in the numbers meant a piece of our dream turning to dust. The trip to Italy, the workshop, the art classes, gone. But the market wasn't the only thing collapsing. Something even more important was breaking inside my husband. The numbers were just numbers until they weren't. Then came the day the crash broke more than just our bank account. It broke John completely. I'll never forget it. He was at the kitchen table staring at his laptop. He was completely still, his face as pale as a sheet. I walked over and looked at the screen. The number I saw made my stomach clench. It was less than half of what we had started with. 40 years of work, cut in half in a few months. "Call Albright," I whispered. John didn't move. "I've been calling," he said, his voice hollow. "It goes straight to voicemail." Panic, cold and sharp, shot through me. I grabbed my phone and dialed myself. Straight to voicemail. The friendly, reassuring voice of David Albright, the man who promised us peace of mind, was gone. We were alone, adrift in a financial hurricane with no captain and a giant hole in our boat. The control he sold us was an illusion. The dream of our golden years had become a waking nightmare. The weeks after the crash were a blur of shame and fear. The silence in our house was worse than shouting. It was the silence of two people who no longer knew how to reach each other. We didn't tell our children. How could we admit we had been so monumentally foolish? John wasn't the same person. The proud, capable man I married disappeared, replaced by a ghost who haunted our home. He would just sit for hours in his armchair staring at nothing. At dinner, I'd set 2 plates on the table, but the silence would sit between us, a third guest. He started sleeping with his back to me, the distance between us in that bed feeling like a canyon. The guilt was eating him alive. "I lost it, Martha," he whispered one night in the dark, his voice cracking. "I lost everything." I wanted to comfort him, to hold him and say we'd get through it. But a bitter, resentful part of me, the part of me that knew it was wrong, the part that had been silenced, wanted to scream. I was scared. "Why didn't you listen to me?" Instead, my voice came out cold and brittle. "We need to figure out what to do." The financial crisis was one thing, but the crisis in our marriage, that almost destroyed us completely, the practical consequences hit us with brutal speed. John was supposed to retire. Now he couldn't. One Saturday, a man showed up with a flatbed truck and towed away his old Mustang. John watched it go, his face a complete mask. A few weeks later, I was cleaning out the garage and found a dusty box. Inside was a catalog for Mustang parts he'd been collecting for years. I remembered him showing our little boy the car for the first time, both their faces alight with future dreams. I sat down on the cold concrete floor and wept, not for the car, but for the man whose dream had just been towed away forever. His spirit was broken. When the grandkids came over, one of them would call out, "Grandpa, come play." But he'd just watch them from his chair, his eyes full of shame, as if from behind a glass wall. We started digging online, searching for Albright's name. We found a forum, a digital graveyard of stories just like ours. A second-grade teacher from Ohio who lost her entire pension, sold on a dream of a secure retirement. A widower from Pennsylvania, a mechanic who had been promised he could leave something for his children, now left with nothing. All of them sold the same dream by the same man, all living the same nightmare. We learned a new word, a word we should have known all along: fiduciary. A fiduciary is legally required to act in your best interest. We learned that many advisors aren't fiduciaries. They're salespeople. The betrayal was profound. He hadn't just given us bad advice. He had exploited our trust for his own gain. He took our money, but he also took 40 years of sunrises, of packed lunches, of overtime shifts. He stole John's pride, my security, and the peaceful rhythm of our lives. The day John was supposed to retire came and went. He asked his boss, a man 20 years younger than him, if he could stay on. So at 65, John kept waking up before the sun and going back to the factory. But the pride was gone. He wasn't working for a dream anymore. He was working to survive. It took a long, long time for the raw pain to fade. We had to confront what happened, not to torture ourselves, but to understand. The lessons we learned were paid for at a terrible price. If sharing them can stop even one other woman, one other family from going through this, then our pain will have had some meaning. First, and this is the most important warning I can give you, never let anyone rush you and never give in to blind trust. We trusted David Albright because he looked the part and told us a story we wanted to hear. We learned far too late about the critical difference between a financial advisor and a fiduciary. A fiduciary is legally and ethically bound to act in your best interest. Please, I'm begging you, as if I were talking to my own daughter, never hand over your life savings without asking one simple question. Are you a fiduciary? Get the answer in writing and then ask, how do you get paid? Understand it completely. That distinction is everything. Second, if you don't understand it, you do not sign it. We signed documents we hadn't really read because we didn't want to look ignorant. We traded away a guaranteed, predictable pension, an asset so secure it's often insured, and we voluntarily took on all the market risk ourselves. You are the final guardian of your money. Ask questions until you are 100% satisfied. Don't let anyone make you feel small or rush you or shame you for asking questions. Your money, your life, your voice. If an advisor makes you feel stupid for asking, that is your sign to walk out the door. And third, know that fear and greed are terrible financial advisors. Albright was a master of emotional manipulation. Our decision wasn't rational. It was an emotional reaction to a great sales pitch. Separate your emotions from your financial decisions. A good plan is made during times of calm, so you don't have to make life-altering choices in a storm. And please, listen to your intuition. That little voice that tells you something is wrong? It's usually right. Don't silence it like I did. We are slowly rebuilding. John is still working. We contribute what we can to a simple, low-cost fund. We've accepted that our retirement will look very different. The garden is smaller, and the workshop is still just an empty corner of the garage. Our biggest recovery has been personal. We finally started talking again. I had to forgive John, but more than that, we had to learn to forgive ourselves. We weren't stupid. We were targeted. We are a team again. We survived the crash, and we're determined to survive the aftermath together. Our story is a painful one, and sadly, it's not unique. It's for everyone who has worked hard, played by the rules, and is now facing big decisions about the money they've saved. A pension is a rare and precious thing in today's world. It's a predictable income in a world that offers very few guarantees. Before you ever consider giving that up, you must understand with absolute clarity what you are trading it for. You are moving from guaranteed income to market risk. But our story isn't just about a pension. It's about a lifetime of trust. For so many of us women, we are taught to put our trust in others, in a company, in an advisor, even in our own husbands. I'm telling you now, as a woman who has survived the worst, when it comes to your security, the most important person to trust is yourself. Your voice matters. Your intuition matters. We lost a fortune, but we refuse to lose the lesson. If you've ever felt your trust turned against you, know this: you're not alone. We survived, and you will too. The best defense is knowledge and a healthy dose of skepticism. Please, if this story reminds you of your mother, your aunt, or your best friend, share it. Protect them. Don't let them be next. Thank you for listening. Watch this next for another gripping tale of retirement gone wrong, plus the lesson you can't afford to miss.